All right, so first off, we've got our shoe rail just temporarily set in place. We're gonna use some tape. I like to use the tan colored tape because you can write on it easily and see your pencil lines. With regular blue tape, it's not quite as easy to see your marks whenever you're doing layout. I've already got one newel post installed, which I'll show you how to do in a little bit. I'll have 2 newel posts up here. The location is determined by these beams in the ceiling. I'm actually bringing the line straight down, and the splice here on my shoe rail is also the center of my newel post. We'll go ahead and mark the center of our shoe rail using a combination square or a double square. It's 7 1/4 wide, so I set this to 3 5/8 and put a pencil line down the center. Now I've got my newel posts laid out. They're 3 1/2 inches wide, so I just went over an inch and 3/4 from my splice right here. And now we'll lay out our balusters. You'll see my dimension to the edge of my newel is 77 3/4. So I open my baluster calculator app. I want to select a flat run. We'll use the baluster calculator app. You can either do a rake or a flat run. We want to do a flat run. Select your max spacing. So I want 3 1/2 inches max. My balusters are a 1/2 inch wide. Selected that right there. My overall length is 77 3/4. And I just changed it. So after you've done that, you hit calculate results. Your space between balusters is 3 7/16. It's 20 spaces. Space between centers is 3 15/16. And then this is your running measurements that you'll use for your layout. The great thing about this app is you don't have to do any special figuring. Your first measurement calculates the correct offset for your starting baluster in the calculation, so you just follow all these measurements and lay it out and it'll be perfect. At this point, my layout for my 1/2 inch mortises is all done on this long run. The baluster calculator app pays for itself literally the first time you use it. I would highly recommend it. So now we can take these down to the mortiser and get our mortises done. Key thing we do want to make sure of is that we have all of the proper markings on these so that we don't get our ends mixed up and we know how to position these when we're all done. We have very little room on this job site, so I've got my tilt mortiser set up in this study. Paul did a great job on this coffered ceiling. These mortisers are more rare than unicorns. They're not patented, so one Chinese company makes them and then the next one undercuts them, so you can't ever find them by brand name, but the design is essentially the same. I had to buy this one from Canada and have it imported. Now, a key thing we have to figure out before we move any further is our flooring transition. If you're doing hardwood flooring, ideally you would want your shoe rail to flush out with the top of your hardwood flooring. In this case, we're using LVP up here, a 1/2 inch thick. So I've got OSB strips put down on here to build up my shoe rail a little more than a 1/2 inch so our LVP can slide underneath of it. You'll notice this blue chalk line going along there. That is the inside of my shoe rail. So that'll give a cavity for the LVP to slide into. If we look over here at our finished shoe rail, you can see that cavity underneath there. So we've got a good 3/4 of an inch to slide our flooring under. Another key detail to always be thinking about is your newel posts. We want them to be super solid. So where I put that OSB down here, I made sure to use a lot of PL Premium subfloor adhesive between the subfloor and that OSB to make sure it's super solid. And then we also use a ton of adhesive attaching the shoe rail as well to make these posts nice and solid. So basically, these areas where my newel post is going to go are completely coated with PL Premium underneath there. So this is like just one solid piece essentially now. And I'll point out again, you can see this blue line, which represents the inside of my shoe rail to keep everything nice and straight the whole way. And then on all of my shoe rails, I spliced it underneath the newel posts just because it was simpler that way. When we attach these newel posts, we want to be able to just make a square cut on the bottom, set it in place, and have it automatically plumb in both directions. To do that, there's two things that we need to have. One is a perfect cut on the bottom of the post. The second thing is we have to have a perfectly level and flat shoe rail. So it's very important before we put this shoe rail on that we prepare the area underneath so that it's going to be as flat as possible. Now the problem that I have here is my OSB is slightly toed up on the outside edge. It's about a 1/16 of an inch out of level. Now you could rip a shim and try and get it perfect going that route, but there is a way that is even more precise, and that is to use tape. So what I'm going to do is actually just layer up a bunch of layers of tape right here on this area until it's absolutely perfectly level underneath where my newel posts are going to be. Now on this next newel location, I just checked it and it's perfectly level, so we don't need to add any tape right here. I just laid out my beads of adhesive on here. So let's take a look at the areas under the newel posts here. We basically want this to be completely solid and filled in with adhesive where the posts are at. That way it is as solid as possible whenever we crank this newel post down. Now I've got this nailed down, but we still want to be careful to check it for level. If it's not level, because there's so much adhesive under it, we can rock it a little bit and manipulate that. Then the nails will hold it in place. PL Premium expands, and this will be locked where it needs to be as this dries. Now ideally, we'll set our newel posts before that adhesive sets. Alrighty, I just took video on how to set this post over here with a Sure-Tite hanger bolt. We're going to move on to this one and get into a little bit more details with some of the tricks and tips and nuances to this. My best advice is follow the instructions that are on the back of the packaging. If you do that exactly, you're going to have good success. We'll start off with a 5/8 spade bit, dead center on our 3.5-inch newel post. All I'm doing here is going through the shoe rail, and that's it. Now we'll switch to a 3/8 spade bit. As you're doing this, the biggest thing is you want to try and stay as plumb as possible, but if it's not perfect, it's okay. You can hit these bolts with a mallet to get them plumb later on. I like to go a little bit further down than I absolutely need to, just to make sure my bolt doesn't get stopped out before I want it to. You also want to make sure when you're doing your layout with your newel posts and everything, that wherever you put this bolt, you don't want it to be going down the very edge of an LVL. Ideally, you want to be dead center. I actually, with my layout, I'm going right between the two LVLs that are sandwiched together, but that should still give me plenty of strength. The kit's going to come with 2 1.5-inch plugs, and then your nut, and then this little piece here, it's like a curved washer that conforms to the radius of your hole that you drilled, and then our big hanger bolt right here. With this hanger bolt, the one thing you absolutely do not want to do is hammer on the end of it. That's going to damage the threads, and it's going to make it a nightmare to try and get this nut on once you're inside the post. Now, if you did need to hammer it, you could put the nut on first and give it a couple taps, but you really shouldn't even need to do that. Ideally, you can just put it right down in the hole, give it some pressure, and it should start threading its way down that 3/8 hole on its own. So there I've got some good friction. We'll take our adjustable wrench and start turning this thing in. We want to turn it in until we have 5 inches sticking up above the top of the shoe rail. Now this bolt has a 1/2-inch diameter. The hole that we're going to drill up through the bottom of the newel post will be 5/8. You're going to have a little bit of wiggle room, but not much. You still want to get this bolt plumbed as perfectly as possible. You're not going to get it perfect with the hole that you drill in. Might get lucky sometimes, but usually the bolt's going to end up being out of plumb a little bit. It's no big deal. Just take your torpedo level. This is actually super close. And we want to plumb it both ways. So here I'm actually pretty far out this way. It actually doesn't take much with this to move it. Try and get it as perfect as possible. Now keep in mind, this bolt is not what is holding the newel post plumb. This bolt is facilitating a huge amount of downward pull pressure. What's going to keep it plumb is having this shoe rail nice and flat and having a perfectly square cut on the bottom of the newel. Past that, once you get it in, to plumb the newel, you'll just have to kind of force it around a little bit. And then as this adhesive that is still wet under here sets up, it should set up really solid after that. Now we need to drill our 1.5-inch hole through the side, which is going to give us access with our wrench to tighten this nut down. They do provide you with 2 different 1.5-inch plugs, an oak plug, and then a paint grade plug. So this is a white oak plug, so I want to use my oak This is a white oak post, so I want to use my white oak plug and ideally grain match it as best as I can. So I am going to choose the flat sawn side of this, and this grain looks like it'll line up pretty well, so I'm going to drill my hole on this side. I'll also strategically position the hole where it's going to be as least visible as possible. In this case, that would mean it's pointed inward towards the balusters whenever I set it. Now I kept my hanger bolt exactly 5 inches up off the top of my shoe rail. So that is going to be the point that I'm going to measure to. I'm going to measure up 5 inches and then mark the center of my post at 1 3/4 inches over. One tip, whenever you're doing stairs, a lot of times you need specialty tools. For instance, I don't ever need 1.5 inch Forstner bit except for this task. So I keep these kinds of tools over here in my stair kit, and that ensures that whenever I'm ready to start doing stair work, I have all of the stair tools that I need, and it makes me a lot more efficient and prepared. Next is probably the trickiest part of this whole process. We need to drill a hole, 5/8 wide hole, perfectly plumb straight down this post, which is going to be about 5 inches deep. It's a little tricky to do, and you really want that hole to come out dead center when it pokes through this hole, because that's going to make your nut line up a lot easier. If it wanders and goes too far to the side, which I've had happen, it's very hard to get the nut on, and it kind of makes things just not work out real great. When you're drilling this hole, you could just hold it out in limbo, but it's going to be hard to hold your newel post perfectly plumb and your drill bit perfectly plumb in both planes at the same time. So if you rest it up against something like the corner of a wall, that gives you a visual reference of what plumb is. So your post will be plumb and your drill bit will be plumb. I will say though, you do want to rotate it every little bit. So on both axes, you're keeping your bit plumb. If you just go straight in this way, you might be perfectly plumb in this direction using the corner, but the bit will tend to want to wander in the wrong direction this way. Now, as far as bits goes, you could go straight into it and just try and drill a perfectly plumb bit with your 5/8 spade bit. Spade bits tend to wander a little bit, so it may be nice to try to do a pilot hole first. You want your bit to be stiff enough to go 5 inches without wandering too much, but you don't want it to be too wide that your spade bit won't follow it. So I've got probably about it's at least 1/8 inch bit here. I also used this 3/16 bit a little bit ago, and it didn't work out real great because it was a little bit too big for this spade bit. I'm finding already I'm trying this 1/8 inch bit and it just flexes too much. I don't like it. So we're going to switch to a 3/16 bit, which is going to be a lot stiffer. Let's see how I did. See, I hit the center of the hole pretty well, but I need to drill my 1.5 inch hole deeper yet in order to get that nut on. Now, if you end up with your pilot hole and your 5/8 hole not centered whenever it pops out up here, you may need to hog out the hole a little bit better so that this washer sits nice and flat in there. If your hole, your pilot hole coming up to the bottom is coming out on the side of this thing, it's not going to be ideal to place this washer, because the washer will then be at an angle, and whenever you crank down on the nut, wherever it's at, it's not going to have pressure all the way across the flat part of this washer. Basically what I mean is, The bottom of this washer is rounded, so it's going to conform to our hole. If we're coming off center in our hole, that's going to make this washer sit like this. And then the problem is whenever our nut needs to go on, our bolt is plumb. So we're only going to be making contact like this. We want to be making contact nice and flat. So that's the goal. Next, we're going to take our utility knife and just score it across the grain underneath where the post is going to be. That'll give the adhesive somewhere to go and something for the adhesive to bite into. Here's a pro tip before we put our post in. Get a box wrench that's got as many points on here as possible. That's going to give you a minimal range of motion to where you can move the wrench just a little bit and still catch the nut, and that's going to make it a lot easier to tighten. Whenever let's say you only had like a 6-point wrench, the range of motion to catch this nut is extremely large. I just realized I drilled my pilot hole, but I haven't drilled my 5/8 hole yet, so let's do that real quick. And again, our goal here is to have this bolt come down so that it is centered in the hole like that. We don't want it off to the side in either direction. Next question, do we use adhesive on the bottom of the newel post or not? I've seen a lot of different things. You wouldn't have to. You could use a minimal amount of wood glue, which is not going to do a lot once it's compromised. I'm using some PL Premium here because PL Premium actually expands as it cures, and I like that with stair work. There are some mistakes that you can make though. You'll notice on this post here, which I set earlier today, I was having some trouble. I couldn't get my wrench to have enough range of motion to bite on the nut, and I actually ended up having to spin this, and the adhesive, you can see, got outside of the post whenever I was rotating it. You don't want that. One way you can get around that is when you put your adhesive on the post, just put it inside of this circle, and then you can spin the post into place, which will make it install faster. It'll be a lot less wrenching, and you won't get adhesive all over the place. Dropping the post on is pretty straightforward. You want to orient your hole in the direction that it's going to be most hidden, and you can drop it all the way down into place just like so. Now that bolt, the top of it should be dead center in your hole horizontally. That's the goal, and that's going to allow you to put your washer on easily. You can see that was very easy to slip on. Now, I actually should have checked this earlier before I put this hanger bolt into place, but it's a good idea to twist your nut on and make sure that the threads aren't damaged before you put it in. Because at this stage, if we go to put this nut in and the threads are damaged and we can't get this on, we're in trouble. I don't think that's going to happen. These are pretty high quality bolts with some massive threads on them, but it's worth checking. And one thing that you can do right here that might make it easier, it's a little hard to get this nut on top of that bolt when the bolt's up in the hole. You may find it easier if you get this into place and then lift the post just a little bit, so now the nut is right on top of that bolt, and you've just got to get it kind of balanced on there, and then just spin it a little bit, and then you can crank it down. Okay, found the thread. So now you can get that nut most of the way down to where it contacts the washer. just with your finger, and now we can put our 3/4 wrench on the end of it. You can tighten it like so, which is a lot of on and off of the wrench, or you can get your wrench on there and you can twist the whole post. And I kind of like this whole thing with twisting the whole post. Just about one twist or so, maybe that was two, I don't even know, but that just immensely speeded up that process. Before we completely crank it down, so I did get a little bit of adhesive squeeze out because I had too much adhesive on it, but it's not too bad. I do want to find my pencil lines, and before I crank it down too hard, I want to kind of beat the post over so that it's on my pencil lines. We'll also check it with a square. And that's looking really good. That's right where it should be. So it's down pretty firmly. I want to take it the rest of the way down as much as I can with this wrench. Again, get as many points on your wrench as possible because that's going to give you more range of motion. You can see I just don't have much right here, and I actually have to flip this wrench every time I rotate it in order to get anything at all. So it's not ideal. I need to get a different wrench for this job. At this point, because I set these shoe rails just a little bit ago, the adhesive is still very wet under there. That gives me a little bit of flexibility with this. Ideally, if your shoe rail is perfectly level and the cut on the bottom of your post is perfectly square, this should be perfectly plumb. But the reference point is so small on the 3.5 by 3.5 square on the bottom of this thing that even the most tiny minute difference from square is going to magnify and make the post out of plumb because the post is so long. So you may have to torque it a little bit, but we do want to do this while the adhesive under here is still damp. I can see that I'm not plumb. My bubble's right on the line, it's not centered, so I'll have to torque this a little bit. When you're doing this, don't try and do too much too fast. Just take it a little bit at a time. You can see, I mean, it's crazy how solid these posts are with those bolts. It's getting real close. So there I'm plumb, that's all it took. I will plumb it this way also. I got to go out quite a bit. I went too much. And there we are, perfectly plumb. We'll check this way again. Gotta go a little more again. So I like that. That looks pretty good. Keep in mind with your newel posts that you can use your handrail to manipulate the posts if you need to get them plumb. You do have that advantage in this plane. The more difficult plane is this way because we don't have anything to pull it one way or the other unless our post is on a corner. So something like this, it's going to be very important that I have it nice and plumb in this direction because there's nothing we can do after it's set. I hope you guys have enjoyed this tutorial on how to set solid newels with Sure-Tite bolts. I started my career almost exclusively using box newels, and solid newels really intimidated me for a long time. Let me tell you, the Sure-Tite bolts are a game changer. Always make sure you have some on hand when you're doing stair work with solid posts. If you've got solid framing underneath your subfloor, they are fast to install and they're extremely solid. If you're curious what I have in my stair kit, check out the video description. I've got a Google Drive spreadsheet that has my entire van with all of my toolkits and the tools I used listed by category in each box, so you can see what my stair kit has in it, and it's got links to everything. So check that out. They're affiliate links. It helps support the channel whenever you use those links. It's in the video description. Otherwise, thanks for watching, and we'll see you next time.